The Global Fight League is a brand new organization in the world of mixed martial arts. It's set to officially launch in 2025, and it's already creating a lot of buzz. Fans, fighters, and analysts are talking about whether the GFL can compete with established promotions like the UFC, Bellator, and the PFL. But why does the GFL matter? Well, it's trying to bring something completely new to MMA. Instead of sticking to the traditional way of running a fight promotion, the GFL has plans to introduce a team-based system complete with a draft, city-based teams, and a regular season leading to playoffs and championships. It's a lot like how major sports leagues like the NBA or NFL operate. So, the big question is, will this new format work? Or will it fail like other promotions that tried to compete with the UFC? In this breakdown, I'll explain how the GFL works, its strengths and weaknesses, and what it needs to do to succeed. How the GFL is different. The GFL isn't your typical MMA promotion. Most fight organizations, like the UFC or Bellator, work by signing fighters to individual contracts. These fighters compete against each other in single matches, trying to climb the rankings to win championship belts. It's straightforward. Fighter A versus Fighter B, winner moves up, loser moves down. The GFL is turning that system upside down. Here's what makes it different. City-based teams. The GFL will have fighters representing teams based in 6 different cities around the world. These cities haven't all been announced yet, but they'll likely include major locations like New York, London, or Tokyo. Fighters won't just fight for themselves, they'll be competing for their team's success. The draft. The league is kicking off with a draft on January 24th, 2025. Just like in the NFL or NBA, team leaders will select fighters from a pool of 400 athletes. This means that fighters will be drafted to represent specific teams. It's a new idea for MMA and something we've never seen before. Regular season and playoffs. Instead of just one-off fights or tournaments, the GFL will have a regular season where teams compete to earn points. The top teams will move on to playoffs, and eventually, the league will crown a champion. It's a more structured approach, similar to how professional sports leagues work. Revenue split. The GFL has promised a 50-50 revenue split with fighters. This is huge because fighter pay has always been a controversial topic in MMA. In the UFC, for example, fighters only get about 20% of the revenue. The GFL's promise could attract a lot of fighters who feel underpaid elsewhere. Who are the fighters in the GFL? One of the first things people want to know about any new MMA promotion is who's fighting. The GFL has already signed some well-known names, but there's a catch. Most of these fighters are veterans, many of whom are past their prime. The big names: Andrei Arlovsky, a former UFC heavyweight champion. Arlovsky is a legend, but he's almost 45 years old. Junior Dos Santos, another former UFC heavyweight champ. Like Arlovsky, he's a fan favorite but hasn't been at his best in recent years. Alexei Oleinik, known as the Boa Constrictor, Oleinik is famous for his submission skills. However, he's nearly 50 years old. Gegard Mousasi, a highly skilled fighter who's had success in the UFC and Bellator. He still has some gas in the tank but isn't in his prime anymore. Anthony Pettis, a former UFC lightweight champion known for his flashy striking style. Pettis is still competitive but hasn't been a top contender for a while. Paige Van Zandt, a popular fighter with a big social media following. She's more of a celebrity fighter at this point than a serious contender. While these fighters bring name recognition, most of them are older or past their peak. The GFL will need to attract younger, top-level talent if it wants to compete with the UFC and PFL in the long run. Here are some of the biggest challenges the GFL will face. 1. Competition from the UFC. The UFC is the king of MMA. It has the best fighters, the biggest events, and the most fans. Whenever a new promotion tries to compete, it's like going up against a giant. Even Bellator, which has been around for over a decade, hasn't been able to challenge the UFC's dominance. 2. PFL's struggles. The Professional Fighters League, PFL, has a similar format to the GFL with a season and playoffs. But even with stars like Francis Ngannou, the PFL struggles to sell pay-per-views. Their recent event only sold about 10,000 PPVs, which isn't great. 3. Team format confusion. The idea of city-based teams is cool, but it could also confuse fans. In MMA, people are used to rooting for individual fighters, not teams. How will fans connect to these city-based teams if the fighters aren't actually from those cities? It's not clear yet how the GFL will handle this. 4. Talent pool. The GFL needs to sign younger, high level fighters to attract hardcore MMA fans. Right now, most of their roster is made up of veterans and fighters who left the UFC or Bellator. Without fresh talent, it will be hard for the GFL to stand out. 5. Money problems. Promising a 50-50 revenue split is great, but it only works if the GFL can make a lot of money. If they can't sell tickets, get TV deals, and attract sponsors, they'll run out of money fast. This has happened to other promotions like Affliction and Strikeforce in the past. What does the GFL need to do to succeed? For the GFL to succeed, it needs to do a few key things: build a strong fan base. The GFL needs to make it easy for fans to follow their league. This means explaining the team system clearly and making the fights exciting and easy to watch. Sign young talent. While veteran fighters bring name recognition, the GFL needs to sign younger stars who can compete at a high level for years to come. Market their events. The GFL will need to promote their events aggressively using social media, YouTube, and other platforms to reach fans. They can't just rely on the old school approach of press conferences and posters. Deliver on their promises. Fighters will only stick around if the GFL delivers on its promise of better pay and benefits. If they can't back up their claims, fighters will leave for other promotions.